The period of time we're looking at is 1943, early 43. On the map there, you'll see to the right Stalingrad, and then from Stalingrad, if I move across, we've got the rivers Don, the river Donets, and then we have Kharkov, and then to the north Kursk, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and then behind Kharkov is the river Dnieper. The reason the army is interested in urban operations is that they think that's where they're going to fight their wars. Interestingly, the Germans and the Russians didn't really think about urban operations. Why would they? They thought they were going to do all their fighting in the open. So neither side really gave any consideration to urban fighting. In terms of the sort of overall terrain, it's similar in some ways to Salisbury Plain, of course, because everything is these days. That's what it looks like. In terms of scale, from the bottom of the map up to Kharkov is similar to from going from Chichester to Aldershot. Aldershot is about the size of Kharkov in terms of geographical space, current Aldershot today. And then Belgorod, mentioned at the end, is about where Harlow is, which I think is in Essex, never having been there, but geographically is the same distance. Kharkov itself, the scale there, so it's a kilometre grid square. You've got the river Lapani running north-south, and then the river Kharkov running east-west. Lapani's 30 to 40 meters wide, and the Kharkov about 20 to 30 meters wide. You've got the airfield in the north, the main railway station, and then down to the southeast is the main industrial zone, and that runs further out of the city as well. The two cathedrals, you can sometimes see those spires in pictures. The Dershprom building, you'll see a picture in a minute, is iconic, it's large, and the massive red square, which everyone talks about, and again, is a feature that we'll hear in our story. What I've called Piper's Bridge, we'll hear about later. And then the Volchansk-Chugyev junction, again, which is an important junction because that's the route out, and that road then runs out to Rogan and towards Chugyev, which are two towns on the outskirts, and is the main east-west road into Kharkov. These are a couple of contemporary photographs. They're taken, the color photographs taken by a German soldier in 1941. You can see the size of the river Lapani. You can see the two cathedrals, and that current bridge has been destroyed. It's obviously rebuilt later on. Bottom right picture, you can see the width of the streets. Some of them are quite wide, nice boulevards almost. Some of the buildings, substantial buildings, but also some of the damage that's been caused to the city. And then to the north, or the top rather, is the Dershprom building with red square, quite an iconic structure. Kharkov is the fourth largest city in the USSR, or the second largest in the Ukraine, depending how you count them. It had about a population of about 1 million. It rises slightly with influx of refugees, but then over time is reduced. The Russians, Kharkov is a tank production factory for the T-34. They take 320 trains and literally take 70 factories and the workers and the tools from Kharkov and move them to the Urals to continue their tank building industry. So massive effort. The population itself, there's obviously there's a significant number of Jewish population are killed, and the population when we're talking about now is probably reduced something to 180 to 190,000 people in the city. So a massive reduction. And this is an air photograph taken from 1941. You can see the River Lapani, the main railway station, Red Square, and over to the left-hand flank on a sort of three white lines is an anti-tank ditch that the Russians have dug as part of the defences for 1941 on the obvious flank where they expected the Germans to attack. So that's the situation on the ground. We're now moving to the actual operation itself. So the advance on the 5th to the 9th of March, the orders basically are attack northwards. So on the left, you've got the Grossdeutschland Division, On their right, you've got the 48th Panzer Corps with 11th Panzer and the 6th Panzer divisions. And then there's a bit of retweaking as the Totenkopf move from the right flank all the way to the left, Leibstandarte in the center and the Das Reich in the center. And effectively, they fight their way northwards, up over this terrain, through the river. Tough fighting. The Russians aren't giving up easily. So it's the 3rd Tank Army. And they're pushing slowly northwards up until the 9th of March, where they're up close to the River Ude. Hausser's plan is the Totenkopf are going to cover to the north and basically protect the northern flank. The Das Reich will send a regiment to cut the manoeuvre to Kharkov Road, and then they will attack in the west, i.e. the most obvious, and basically attract the attention of the defenders. Meanwhile, the Leibstandarte will fight their way around to the top and then come down on 3 axes into the actual city itself. So that's what the plan looks like in a bit of detail. Harmel coming in from the left, from the 9 o'clock position. Then you've got the 3 columns moving down. You've got Vish with the 2nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment. He's moving down the railway line basically to seize the railway. You then have Witt and the 1st Panzer Grenadier Regiment. They're going to move down the Sumska Road and seize the Red Square. And then Mayer with his Recce Battalion group is going to go all the way around the back, come down and try and cut off the escape route, if you like, the Volchansk-Chugayev junction. That's the plan. Remember, they've given orders on the 9th. It takes them until the 11th to fight their way through the last remaining 10 kilometers or so of countryside to get into a position so they can actually launch their attack. And it doesn't quite happen as we expect. This is a lovely picture of Witt's regiment on the Sumska Road. That's just on the to the north of the airfield. You can see that they're not under. They don't feel they're under any threat. So they've clearly got air superiority at this stage. And I love the picture of the chaps on the Panzer II reading their Sporting Life. Wondering what the football scores were and how the racing was going. So the 11th of March, the attack. So Harmel's attack from the west hits an unexpected anti-tank ditch, and he's held up there. Doesn't go any further forward, and that afternoon, that's as far as he's got. Vish, fighting down from the north, reaches Alexeyevka, which is one of the sort of villages on the outskirts or suburbs on the outskirts. Calls in a Stuka attack at 13:25 to try and help dislodge the Russian defenders. That doesn't work. And then one of his company commanders, Becker, who wins a Knight's Cross, he infiltrates his company through the Russian position, seizes some houses on a bit of high ground, and holds those against the Russian counterattacks. And by doing that, enables the flanking battalion to start moving down the railway line. But that's as far as they get. Witt, if you remember where that picture was taken, is just off the north of the map. He moves down round the bend, is counterattacked by the Russians across the airfield. Bravely, but rather ineptly, Russian infantry trying to attack across the airfield. He uses his flak, so 20 and 30 millimeter cannons. They pretty much decimate those attacks. And then he pushes down towards Red Square. And he's reaching that about midday-ish. And at that stage, Belov then counterattacks with the 86th, which is beaten back. Witt continues pushing forward. And then finally, at last light, with his last reserve, which is the 179th Tank Brigade, what's left of it, Belov launches another attack, which forces Witt back. So Witt goes back. Some of his troops, as an account, some of his soldiers are sat in the cellar overlooking Red Square with the Russians moving around them. So that must have been quite an interesting night they spent there. Mayer, meanwhile, has moved all the way around. He's been ambushed by a pair of T-34s, knocked out, tank destroyed. He fights his way down to a cemetery, which is that position that's shown there. The Russians realize what he's doing and continually counterattack him. But he's reached that position at midday. That evening, he sends one of his young officers, Weser, who's a platoon commander. He sends him with some vehicles and trucks, sends him to link up with Witt. So he takes a route, I'm not sure which, but it must be directly across the city, links up with Witt, gets some ammunition and fuel. On the way back, he is trapped by the Russians in a school. And I reckon, because I've spent hours looking at Google Maps and stuff, where that blue blob is. So Weser gets trapped there with his little relief party. But two of his NCOs with a couple of trucks managed to get their way through to Meyer. So Meyer gets a resupply of fuel and ammunition, but Weser's cut off in the schoolyard. I've read one account where Weser wins his Knight's Cross for killing two Russian tank commanders with his pistol. So it must have been fairly short range, whatever was going on there. So that's the situation on the 11th of March. The 12th of March, Hoth says, right, get the Dasgreit out of there. I want them pushing northwards, to which Hausser just ignores him because he wants the attack continue. So 0300, Harmel leads with his pioneers. So his engineers try to attack the anti-tank ditch. They get beaten back. They re-attack. But by 0315, they've actually breached the anti-tank ditch and they've got a 300-meter wide gap. And 0515, they start moving their armor. They're able to start pushing their tanks over the anti-tank ditch and towards the city. At first light, the Russian Air Force makes a rare appearance and actually attacks that breach, but they're driven off by the light flak that the Harmel's group has got. They all continue to push into the city, and by 1000 hours, they've got about a kilometer into Kharkov itself. Up on Vish with the 2nd Regiment, they're continuing to fight their way down through towards the railway station. It takes them all day. By the evening, they actually capture the railway station. So some quite hard fighting there. Witt is still held up at Red Square, but his rear battalion under Hansen moves around, infiltrates behind the defenders, and we'll look at that in a little detail in a minute. And that unlocks the defense there, and the Russians start withdrawing. Meyer, meanwhile, has continued to push towards the junction, again under Russian attack, and that's where Piper then decides to weave between Witt and Vish, goes down, seizes a bridge, and then moves across, picks up Weser on the way, and then briefly links up with Meyer, another drop of supplies, and then falls back to the bridge that he secured. We'll just look at those two in a little bit more detail. So that's the aerial photograph. That's the route Hansen takes, comes down that route. He loses a number of his company commanders to sniper fire, but the fact that he ends up moving behind the Russian defenders, he infiltrates around the back effectively. And the bottom left picture there, that's his group fighting northwards back towards Witt. You've got two Panzer IVs, a Panzer Jaeger, Marder, and just hidden by the tree is a PaK anti-tank gun. So he's lots of firepower fighting his way through there. And Piper, he takes, and again, I'm a little unclear. I'm wondering if he just did this. I haven't found anything to prove one way or the other, whether he just did this off his own bat. Bear in mind that his commander is still trying to clear the railway station, takes that route over, finds the bridges that have been left up by the Russians, links up briefly with Hansen, then heads all the way down and then seizes that bridge, pushes forward, links up with Meyer, and then returns back. And that's the situation on the 12th. So things are looking a little better, I would suggest, for the Germans. 13th of March, Hoth is now incandescent. He wants the Das Reich out of the city. And Hausser said, yeah, it'll be easier once I've cleared further south, and then they can drive through the city rather than sending them the long way around. And I suppose, arguably, he's got a point. So what happens is Bissinger is left behind with his battalion, and Harmel heads out with his regiment up the Sumska Road. And by that afternoon, they are around fighting towards that village of Rogan, which I remember you pointed out to early. So that afternoon, they're off there. Frey is sent round to link up with Mayer down that road. And effectively, everyone else is now fighting down towards the link up with Piper. That happens in the afternoon. And then they're starting to push out. And by the afternoon, Piper and Mayer have linked up. And the Germans have pushed forward to where those sort of black lines are. And that's effectively, they've started to pretty much control the bulk of the city. Propaganda is important. Germans are adept at, their camera teams, still photographers and camera teams are always where the action is. They're up forward. This is some propaganda filming that's going on. On the left there is Vic with his half track. And then these series of photographs are from the same bit of footage. And on the right, you can see the film cameraman actually peering around the corner, filming the cameras. They do get up to the front, filming a lot of the fighting, but often a lot of this stuff is literally just propaganda for the general public at home to show how good our forces are, and importantly to show that we've got lots of tanks. Filming tanks is more interesting than filming infantry with their horses struggling through mud. Final clearance then, effectively Piper and Mayer continue pushing down into the industrial zone. And this is where the attack by the Das Reich and the 11th Panzer towards Rogan on the outskirts, that is where Belov orders the withdrawal. And the 62nd Guards Rifle Division, if you remember the guys who were in originally, ordered out. They are then ordered to form the rear guard. The Russians leave any heavy equipment and they're moving out on foot and effectively fleeing back down the last road that they can before they get cut off. The last thing they want to do is be cut off and be a prisoner, certainly of the Waffen SS. And so really the final acts, if you like, it's announced, there's a radio bulletin on the 15th of March that the Waffen SS units with powerful Luftwaffe support after days of bitter struggle and in a pincer attack from north and east have reconquered Kharkov. In fact, the fighting goes on till the 16th because there's still pockets that are holding out, but that doesn't matter. Zaitsev, who's the commander of the 62nd Guards Rifle Division, he has the misfortune of being wounded and then being captured. So he's a German prisoner. After the war, once he's liberated, he's interviewed by the NKVD, the secret police, as it were, for several months. And then it's determined that actually he was genuinely wounded and had put up a good fight. So he's reinstated and I think retires as a major general. So it clearly didn't do him any lasting harm. And then the final act is the coup de main of seizing the bridge at Belgorod, which is our friend Piper, who heads northwards with a little mixed group. Again, Luftwaffe support. A couple of Tigers are working at this stage, and he seizes Belgorod. And effectively, at this stage, everyone, both sides, are absolutely exhausted, and the Rasputitsa has kicked in. So there's mud everywhere, and no one's moving. And frankly, they're all tired, and that's the end of it. That sets up the prelude to Kursk, as it were, basically the big bulge, which you're probably all familiar with, and that's where it leaves us. In terms of casualties, it's really difficult to pick out what the actual casualties are and where they occurred. So the SS-PanzerKorps loses 4,500 killed and 7,000 wounded. The Russians, again, these figures are who quite knows where they come from. 45,000 killed and 41,000 wounded. So significant. So the Russians do suffer significant losses, but not all of it in the battle actually within Kharkov itself. In terms of civilian casualties, very difficult to work out. I think it's probably somewhere to be 20 to 30,000 civilians are killed, unfortunately.